Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Brad Thomas with True Lies Podcast, brand new podcast. It's all about crappie fishing, and we have three crappie fishermen with us. We have Tim Malloy, which is from Iowa. We got Jerod from Iowa, and we got Randy. How do you say your last name, Randy?
Howton.
Howton, and he's from Arizona. He's a guide out in Arizona. So we're going to talk about how Livescope or uh, forward sonar has changed crappie fishing. So we're going to go ahead and get right in it, and we're going to start with Tim Malloy. And why do you think forward facing sonar has hurt crappie fishing? And here's the biggest thing: has it hurt the population? What are your thoughts?
Brad, I don't think forward-facing sonar has hurt crappie fishing whatsoever. I think it's actually enhanced it greatly. I don't believe it's hurt populations either. I think it's made us way more efficient, and I don't think it's hurt at all. It's only helped. We can see and size fish before we catch them. It may have hurt some of the tournament scenes a little bit. But that's the only thing I can think, that maybe there's some people that may not be as confident as they were before forward-facing sonar, so they're maybe not fishing as many tournaments. But I think it's really helped us more than hurt anything.
Absolutely. My biggest thing is when you're targeting big fish, you're leaving those little fish alone, right? So that kind of helps them let them grow, right? And you said the national trails are really hurting, or even the state trails, because of Livescope. I mean, do you really think it's the Livescope or the Hummingbird? Do you really think it's that, or do you think it's something else?
I don't know. It just seems like there were more tournament anglers prior to the onset, and before it got big, single pulling, blind dipping timber and spider rigging. It seemed like we had more boats at state levels and national levels. But I don't know if forward facing sonar is a reason. It's the only thing I can think of. The economy seems to be doing well. Maybe gas prices may be affecting it a little bit. Demographics seem to be similar to before Livescope. So I don't know. I just think it's a lot of things, and the cost of of the electronics and the trolling motors that they go on, and the mounts that we all have them on our boats, that adds up. We got a lot more money on our boats than we ever had before, and that could also be leading to maybe fewer tournament anglers, as they don't feel they want to make that investment to be able to compete, with those tools. So
Absolutely, yeah.
that'd be my take.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. It's a huge investment just to even get into a tournament, never known all the technology and all the other stuff you got to have on the boat. So definitely agree with you on that one. Um, I appreciate you on that one. Randy, I got a question for you, bud. Since you're a guide in Arizona and you're probably got to be on Livescope, what, every other day or every day? So one question I'd like to ask you is, what have you learned about crappie behavior from Livescope, and how did it change the way you fished?
Well, the first thing I learned about Livescope and fishing crappie is they're a lot more aggressive than we've ever given them credit for. They're absolute beasts. They want to chase. They want to hunt. They want to chase your jig down. They compete for it. There's a lot of times when I'll drop into a tree and have three or four fish pushing each other out of the way just to get to the jig first.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I don't think we knew that before Livescope. I mean, we had
Absolutely not.
side scan. Yeah, I mean, we had side scan. We had the 360, but we didn't see anything live. So, yeah, I'm with you on that one. I didn't know they were that aggressive either. So,
Yeah, that was a big eye opener for me. And the techniques, they don't generally want it sitting still. They want it running away from them. They want to chase it down and attack it. And good boy, you got to love that thump.
Absolutely. And is that, you're in Arizona, you guys have mostly black crappie, but I do know you have some white crappie. When it comes to white crappies, do they chase it too, or do you have to, sit there and set it still right on their nose? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
You're absolutely right. The white crappie, they want it right in front of their nose, and they're usually sitting on timber or at the bottom of a mesquite tree. And you just got to kind of got to put it on their face and let them stare at it for a second before they nail it. But once they nail it, they hammer it.
Yeah, absolutely. Before Livescope, what other techniques did you do? Did you do like spider rigging or side pulling or anything like that, Randy? Or did you just jig the whole time?
But before Livescope, I was a March and April slip bobber guy. Aside from the slip bobber, I'd throw a beetle spin, buzzing it across the shallow waters. But that was the extent of it. Now that I got Livescope, it's just a whole new world. All years opened up for me, and yeah, it's just a phenomenal piece of technology.
Absolutely. Let's say there's somebody on this podcast that's listening that is, let's say, new to Livescope. What is one thing you would tell them?
The first thing I would tell them, especially fishing a jig, I know it's called a jig and it means to jig, but don't jig that thing. It's just not natural for a minnow to bounce back into a fish's face when he's chasing it. Keep it moving steady. Steady retrieves are always going to work a whole lot better than bouncing a jig up and down in front of their face.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great tip. Well, Jerod, I'm going to get to you. With all the new technology, there seems to be a learning curve. How long did it take you to learn Livescope, and how long did it take you to feel comfortable with it? Or are you still not comfortable with it? Are you still learning?
I don't think I've done either of those yet. I'll tell you, when I first got it, I was a spider rigger by trade per se, and a single poler, like most guys. And one of the other guys on this podcast can probably affirm this story. I got to the point the first year that I had it, first 6 or 8 months that I had Livescope, where I called Tim Malloy and I said, "Hey, you got to get in my boat with me, or I got to get in yours, or I'm going to sell this crap and go back to what I know."
Absolutely, yeah.
It's a struggle, and people they advertise it as plug and play, and it is to an extent. You can plug it up and see fish and see your jig and this and that, but that's not all there is to it. It does take some time. And to add on to what Randy said, my advice to a new Livescoper would be patience.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've had Livescope for 2 years now, and, I'm not that great of a fisherman anyway. I get my butt kicked at every tournament I seem to enter in if it's not in Nebraska. So, I really struggle with it, but I think you just got to be persistent. I mean, the more time you can get with it, especially on the water, you're going to learn more. And it's not all Livescope. I think it's fish behavior. You need to learn that also. I mean, just because you have Livescope doesn't mean you're just going to put fish in a boat over and over and over, for sure.
Yeah, I think you still have to be able to, you got to do the old school stuff too, is get out a map and be able to read a lake, whether it's a paper map or I still have paper maps in my boat.
Absolutely.
You got to be able to read that, or your mapping software on whatever brand of, unit you have on your boat. That's any lake. We're going to have a tournament this Saturday on Sailorville, which I would consider my home lake.
Yeah.
And I was tootling around in my boat today, just picking the map apart. And I've fished that lake for 15 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, you just got to stay on top of things. I mean, just because we have new technology, that doesn't mean you just throw old technology out the window. I just don't think you need to do that. Yes, will new technology make you a better fisherman? Sure, if you learn it and stay with it and stay persistent. But you can't lose what you had before because I mean, it's just going to put, it's like everybody says it's cheating. It's not cheating. It helps you. It's a tool. So definitely agree with you on that, Jerod.
To maybe add a little bit to Jerod's story there, and maybe a tip as well is getting in the boat with a guide. There's lots of guides out there that will do Livescope training and lessons. Jerod had a problem with his Garmin system and was struggling and didn't know he had a problem with it until we got in and took a look at what he was seeing, and it turned out he had a bad black box, wasn't it, Jerod? It wasn't any settings. We fine tuned the settings as fine as we could, and it was a problem. He had a very bad delay, and got it checked out and exchanged, and it took care of his problem. But without having a buddy or a guide that gets in and takes a look for you, you wouldn't have known that. So,
well, yeah, I mean, I fished
tip I would have.
How long did I fish with that system, Tim?
A year, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Oh,
and
wow.
it was, and so the long story short, the issue was it was the black box, like Tim said, but there was a drag or a delay in it, so I was fishing old information, and I didn't know it because that was the only system that I'd ever seen. So for a year, I was fishing information that had already passed.
Oh man,
it was awful.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That would have made me throw the thing into the bottom of the lake for sure. That would have been very frustrating. And I do think that, with YouTube and Facebook or social media in general, you can really kind of find your answers if you Google it. But if you're brand new, you don't really know. So yeah, absolutely. That would be very, very stressful for me, especially if you're in a tournament trying to deal with that, So, Tim, you mentioned a little bit about the cost of Livescope. I think it's come down in the last couple of years. But you mentioned, you got wiring, you got installation, you got, the stands to hold them. And, I would say some people make their own PVC pipe and put their forward sonar on that. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do, but if you don't have that expertise, that costs you a fortune. If you take it to any boat dealership to have them installed, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, kind of tell our listeners that, let's say if they're new or they do have Livescope and they've had it for a while, but if something breaks or, just kind of talk a little bit about how I would say anglers can save their money and still help them out with Livescope.
Well, you can start off, like many of us did with the smallest size screen, and you don't have to have a 16-inch screen and a 34 transducer and a beat down outdoors mount, and you don't have to have, what a lot of the National Trail tournament anglers have. You can get into it very reasonable, and we fished 2 years and won a lot of state trail tournaments with a 9-inch screen. And
Yep.
it's still that 93 SV is still an awesome unit.
Yep.
But it's how far do you want to go? Some of us my partner and I are fortunate enough to be able to have to both have boats for one thing, but also to have the same electronics on our Livescope unit, our same head unit, so that if one of us has to take the other's boat to pre-fish, or we get in on tournament day and both of us can run the trolling motor, we have the head unit that we're familiar with. We have all our settings pretty much the same, and we can both operate and be efficient that way. But no, you don't have to have 16-inch screens or dual units or anything like that to be effective. I think most of us believe in, at least on the tournament side, believe on the transducer probably needs to be on the trolling motor, but that's not a necessity either. There's a lot of great people doing great things with the wands out the side and everything else. So it's a matter of preference. It's still about boat control. just because you have Livescope isn't going to make you catch fish. You still got to put it on their nose. You got to be able to control that boat, and so. But back to your question, Brad, I think you can get into Livescope very, very efficiently.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Garmin even has a 7-inch screen that does Livescope. So I think it's the 73 SV. So, if you really want to go cheap, you really can. You can go to Bass Pro and get you, a holder for like $50. So, yeah, I mean, you still would have to install it or have somebody else install it, but that's still really not that bad, especially if you're new to it or you want to you want to learn and do what I tell you what I did. I started out with a 73 SV. I did. And then I moved to a 9. I went to the 93 SV and now I have a 10-inch. I had the 102 SV and I had a 12. I tried it and I didn't like it. So I sold it and I stayed with my 10 and that's what I'm comfortable with. I mean, stay what you're comfortable with. I mean, the 16-inch screens is not, in my opinion, not all cut up to be. I mean, yeah, it's nice, big. It's, but what I learned mostly was on a 10-inch screen and a 9-inch screen. So that's what I'm comfortable with. I know I got on somebody's boat with a 16-inch and I was just like, holy crap, that thing's huge. Yeah, it was clear. I could see everything, but when it comes to, I would say, gauging how big that fish is, I didn't have a clue. And to me, I just felt like I had to relearn everything. And I just didn't want to do that because I can't spend the time on the water like everybody else, that has a full-time job to learn that all over again. So I wasn't going to do it. So I kept with a 10-inch screen. So definitely you can do that. So, I want to ask Jerod a question here and see what his thoughts are, because I hear this a lot. I see it on Facebook. I see it all over social media. Do you think the National Crappie Trails or other tournaments are suffering because of Livescope, and should they ban them? Because I hear it constantly. I mean, you see it on comments, you see it everywhere. My personal opinion is no. What's your opinion, Jerod?
I think if you ban it, you're going to take a bigger hit, losing guys than you would leaving it. I think, technology is what it is. You're going to have to, it's here to stay, in my opinion, and you're either going to embrace it or not, and as far
Absolutely.
as has it hurt the numbers of boats you're getting in each tournament? Maybe. I mean, you could go both ways with it, I suppose. There's probably a few people, I know people, everybody on this podcast knows people, couple, 2, 3 guys that, man, I'd really like to fish that tournament, but I just can't compete with you guys because I don't have Livescope, or I've only had it for a few months. I'm not good enough, or I don't have a big fancy boat, or, whatever the case is. I'm sure you lose a few guys like that, for sure. But
Well, did you hear about that story? Sorry to cut you off, but do you remember that story out of Florida with that guy that had a 16-foot John boat? He had no Livescope. He didn't even have a graph in there, and he
yeah,
won the tournament.
it's on the St. Johns River.
Yeah.
It's a great story.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, kind of talk about that a little bit, Jerod, because I hear that a lot. I hear a lot of excuses, oh, I don't have Livescope, exactly what you said. And then this guy comes out and wins it. I mean, he won a national trail tournament with not even a graph, and he was using cane poles. I mean, hey, if you're a good fisherman, you're a good fisherman. It doesn't matter what you have in the boat, guys.
And that old boy's probably forgot more about crappie fishermen than crappie fishing than I'll ever know, which is exactly how he won that.
Yep.
But go back to what Tim said and what you said. There's a guy on our trail. The first couple years that this trail was going, he fished out of how big was Greg's boat, Tim? 16-foot John boat. He's since upgraded. He's since upgraded to a fiberglass boat, but Greg Oker handed out plenty of butt whoopings, and all he had was a 16-foot John boat and a 10-inch screen. That's it. That's all he had in his entire boat. Didn't have a seat in it. Didn't have nothing.
Yep. Yeah, it's all about what's up here, right, guys? It's not about what's in front of you. It's about what's, in your brain and what you've learned in the past. So, yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to talk to Randy because he's a guide and he's probably on the water more than I'd probably all three of us are combined. Randy, can you go over some basic settings for your Garmin Livescope and kind of help out somebody that's new?
Yeah, I sure can. I have a lot of clients out there, and a lot of them do want the Garmin tutorials. And one of the things I tell them all the time is consistency. I really like to set that my length at 40 feet. I like to keep it at 40 feet. That helps me recognize exactly what I'm looking at all the time. It helps me figure out my distance I'm going to cast. It helps me figure out where the fish are, where I need to cast. It just staying consistent with your graph is going to help you. My gain, I like it set around 60. I have the LVS 34, so I like to turn the color scheme down, way down to about 10%. And I adjust my depth accordingly. But generally, I like to keep my depth set right around 30 feet as well. If you have,
And you're no, I'm sorry. In Arizona, you're fishing deeper water than I would say more than Midwest or Southern guys. So, you know, what is your average depth you would say you're fishing, just to kind of give our listeners a little gauge there?
20 to 30 feet deep is kind of our wheelhouse most of the year. This winter, it got colder than it ever has before in Arizona, and our water temperatures were low. I was catching crappie in 60 foot of water very consistently. But this is the first time it's done that. We've had a whole lot of rain, lot of cold weather. It's not normal for Arizona. Normally, I'm in 20 to 30 foot of water just about all the time. And the fish stay there just about all year, except for when they get up to spawn.
Yeah.
So it's very consistent. They move a lot, but they're going to be there somewhere.
Absolutely. You know, I'd say Midwestern and Southern guys or even Southeastern guys, to me, I like to keep mine at 15 feet because I'm usually fishing between 15 feet and 3 feet. That's kind of my wheelhouse. So that's kind of where I stay. And, Randy mentioned consistency. So I'm always looking out 40 feet and I'm keeping mine at 15 foot. I never deviate from that. If I get in, let's say 6 foot of water or 3 foot of water, I'm still have my depth set at 15 feet because that still tells me how big that fish is. It's all about gauging. So, that's why I keep that. Does any of you turn on that bottom to kind of see the bottom a little bit better? Have you ever turned that option on? I can't remember what it's called.
Talking about
Bottom,
bottom fill.
yeah,
Yeah, bottom fill. That's it.
Don't use bottom fill.
Don't
yeah,
use it.
me
No,
neither.
I
no.
now I've tried it because sometimes I see these crappie go down in the mud and then I lose them, right? And I usually try to wait them out if it's a big fish. But I turned that on one time, and to be honest with you, I felt like I could see him. I mean, I felt like I could make him out, right, and actually know where he was. But did I catch him? No. So I couldn't really tell you if that bottom fill even works. I'm definitely going to try that a little bit more. And maybe on our next podcast, hopefully I've used it and maybe I can tell you if I like it or not. But as of now, I don't have it on usually. But if I see a crappie go down at the bottom and I can't see him or I lose him, I usually try to turn that on just to see if I could see him. So, I mean,
Brad, this is something that might help you with that. We kind of discovered this not too long ago, maybe in the last couple of months. There's a color scheme called Aqua,
mhm,
and we're able to see bottom fish better with Aqua than we are our normal black emerald that we normally use.
really?
Started going to that Aqua, and they kind of show up better on the bottom.
Oh,
So
nice.
that's just maybe it's just our graph, our system, our setup, but
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's a tip for you.
Awesome. That's a great tip, Tim. What colors? I'm going to start with Tim, and you tell me what colors you use on a normal basis. Go ahead, Tim.
As far as
The
live scope
graph.
settings,
Yes.
like I said, it's for probably 2 years. It's been black emerald, but like I said, recently we're starting to use aqua more and more.
Jerod?
Same as Tim. I'm a black emerald guy, and there's 2 times I'll use the aquas when the fish are in the mud. That does work. They have a white pop to them that kind of separates them from the mud, and I can pick out fish in brush better. If I'm fishing a lot of brush fish, then I'll go to the aqua.
Okay. Randy, what do you use?
I'm a black emerald guy also. I don't change it at all. Black emerald all the way, and I've tried some of the other settings. But this aqua thing, it's got me intrigued. I'm going to play with that tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm definitely intrigued too because I'm with Randy. I've always used black emerald. I've tried crawfish. I do like it when I'd say it's a very cloudy day. I'll use crawfish and I really love it. Like I'd say right in the beginning in the morning, I'll go crawfish. And then when that sun comes straight up and it's above me, I go straight to black emerald and I never go back. So yeah, that's definitely got me intrigued. I'm going to have to try that for sure. That was a great tip, Tim. Tim, I'm going to ask you this hard question. You tell me what you think. I hear a lot of Livescope is cheating. What is your response to that?
I strongly disagree. Livescope has taught us as fishermen way more, like Randy was saying earlier, all of the things that it taught us about fish activity, fish movement, habits. And I talk about efficiency. You can go, whether you're fun fishing for a limit, for a fish fry, or you're tournament fishing for 7 fish or 5 fish, whatever the case may be. Your time on the water is valuable, and you can be way more successful with Livescope than without. But it's not for everybody. I understand technology is hard for a lot of people to grasp and to grow with, and that's okay. You don't have to have Livescope to catch fish. There's a lot of fish caught long before Livescope with many methods. I still love spider rigging myself. To me, that's a fun, relaxing way to fish, and I need to force myself to do it more. But
Yeah,
to say that Livescope ruined fishing, I strongly disagree.
yeah, I totally agree with you, Tim. I was a huge spider rigging for a long time, and I really just got comfortable spider rigging when Livescope came out. So I love spider rigging, and Ronnie Cap said one time, "I don't need to feel the thump; I just need to see the thump." That's what I like, and
Absolutely.
I'm really resonate with him because I tell you what, when you're sitting there and you got, let's say in Iowa, you can do six rods if you have 2 people in the boat, right? You got to pay for that extra rod. But when you got 16-foot rods in front of your boat and one goes down, that's just the best feeling. It really is. And I mean, you can still spider rig with Livescope. We had a guy at our last tournament that I think he got fifth or sixth spider rigging, and he said, "Man, if I had a couple more hours, I probably would have won the thing." And that just says spider rigging is not dead. I still see people side pulling. I mean, I saw a guy the other day had two 20-foot rods hanging out the side of his boats. I have no idea what he was dragging. I have no idea. But I was like, I asked him, I said, "Were you crappie fishing?" He goes, "I sure was." And he shows me his colorful. And I'm like, hey, that technique's not dead either, guys. So, there's a lot of techniques out there that are not dead because of Livescope. You can still do it for sure. And the guy had Livescope in the back of his boat and in the front of his boat. So I was like, wow, what a system. I've never seen that before. And I tried to talk to him to come crappie fish tournaments in Iowa. So hopefully we see him. But yeah, I thought that was a really cool setup for sure. Jerod, I wanted to ask you this question because you said something before that, Livescope changed the way it didn't change the way you tackled a lake. So let's say you're on a brand new lake, okay? You have Livescope, how are you going to tackle that? Kind of walk us through and tell our listeners how you would tackle a brand new lake, even if you have Livescope.
Typically, what I will do on a lake is I'll run as far up it as I can, as far up the river. If it's a reservoir, I'll run as far up that thing as I can get and turn around and fish my way out. And until I find fish or a place that I think should have them, and if I make it all the way to the dam, then I guess I missed them. But that's typically what I will do.
So do you, like you said, you looked at paper maps and stuff like that? I have that Garmin app on my phone and I get it out, especially if I have a tournament coming up. I probably look at it, I don't know, 6, 7 times a day for a week to really figure out how I'm going to tackle things or where I'm going to go or where this tree is or where this brush is or, whatever, and kind of even on a lake I've been, oh, here's a waypoint that I had, should I go check that out? Let's look at the water temp, get on the website. What's the water level? Stuff like that. Weather. I mean, I'm sure you still do that, correct?
Yeah, probably more than I should. I'll have both my units on my console. I'll have one on map and one on side scan. I'll have my phone. I'll have one app of Navionics open. I'll have Onyx open. I'll pull up Google Earth. If there's a map that gives me a different view, or the satellite picture was taken in April versus December, I'll use it. I just,
anything to give you an edge, right?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I've got an edge. I'm still looking for it, but I use a lot of different maps.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, Livescope hasn't changed that. I mean, it just hasn't, and I asked this question because I saw it the other day on one of the Facebook groups and I was just like, why? One guy said, well, I have Livescope now. I don't need to, do all that homework anymore. I just go out there. No, I don't. That's the craziest thing I ever heard. And why I asked that, because I saw multiple people say, yeah, that's what I do too. That's why you're not putting enough fish in the boat. You still got to do your homework. You still got to do the old school. Like I said, you got to use this. You can't use the screen in front of you for sure. So,
well, I think there's a time of year where you could probably pull that off. A 2-week period where 95% of the fish are up on the bank. But ironically, that's probably the 2-week period of the year where you can shut your Livescope off and catch just as many fish.
Absolutely. You can get your 2-minute, your 1-man limit in probably 15 minutes.
Yeah.
The spawn's very overrated. I'm not a big fan. I like pre-spawn and post-spawn myself. So to me, there's no challenge to it. That's one thing. Randy, I'll ask you this question. Since you're in Arizona, that's mostly a bass fisherman. I would say it's king in Arizona, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm sure you've done some bass fishing. And people always tell me, oh, it's harder to bass fish than it is crappie fish. And yes, I'm going there because I kind of want to talk about it, because I think crappie fishing is harder than any other fishing I've ever tried. I used to fish tournaments on walleye trails. I've done bass tournaments on state trails when I was in high school, and I was even on a bass high school fishing team. And I think crappie fishing is the hardest thing I've ever tried to do, and I've been fishing pretty much my whole life. So what are your thoughts on that, Randy?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Crappie can be the most temperamental fish out there.
Absolutely.
You some days there's nothing you can do to get them to bite. They'll sit there and stare at your bait, blow bubbles, and sink to the bottom. I mean, there's just nothing you can do. Bass, man, you can stimulate them, you can aggravate them, cause reaction bites. There's a lot of things you can do to a bass to get it to bite. But a crappie, if he doesn't want to bite, he doesn't want to bite. If he doesn't want to bite chartreuse, he's not going to bite chartreuse. He wants red. I mean, that's all there is to it. The crappie are the most finicky fish there are out there. And, some days you got a 2-hour window where they're on fire. and won't do anything the rest of the day.
Yeah, and I tell you what, I've experienced that. I think we all have, where, they'll go in pockets. Like, you'll be, let's say, for 2 hours, all they do is bite, 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 bite. They'll even fight over the bait, and then 2 seconds later, they're done. They're lockjaw. I'm not eating. Screw you. Go somewhere else. I'm done with you. And it's like, wow, what happened here? When I first started crappie fishing, I was like, holy crap. I asked my grandpa one day, I said, man, these things are crazy. And he told me they're the chicken of the sea. And I actually resonated with that, because I'm like, I was out crappie fishing in a tournament one day, and I was 50 feet away from it. And I was in one on my trolling motor, and I'm sitting here watching on Livescope, and I got within 50 feet and it took off. And I'm just like, holy crap. It's like, and then, like, my grandpa was talking in my ear. I told you, and that was way before Livescope. So, it's kind of funny how that is. But yeah, I agree with you, Randy. Crappie fishing is definitely interesting. And I mean, Tim, you've been fishing a long time. You fished other trails, you fished other species. Do you feel that way too?
I don't know. You're probably going to be mad at me for this answer, but I believe fish eat every day, and somewhere they're chomping. And we've got a
Absolutely.
saying, if they're not acting right here, let's move.
Yeah,
And you can move a half mile down the lake and they act completely different.
that is
So
very true.
I don't like excuses that they're too hard to catch, or they're too finicky, or they're too this, or they're too that. It's a puzzle. It's a new puzzle every day, and we have to solve it. Sometimes we run out of time before we solve the puzzle that day, but
Absolutely.
they're biting somewhere on the lake. You just got to figure that out and figure out what they want.
Yeah, and
That's
that's
my philosophy.
my dad used to say, well, that separates the men from the boys, right? It does. And I mean,
I
what
got a friend of mine that he starts making excuses before you even get to the lake, and one of them is, man, it's a full moon. They fed all night. We're not going to catch anything this morning. It's like, dude, you're beat before you even get there.
yeah.
So I don't know. I just got that outlook that they're biting somewhere. You just got to figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I had a trail in Nebraska, you know, I couldn't get enough boats. Never could. And I started talking to people everywhere I went. I started talking to people in Nebraska, and I've talked to people in other states. And this is like just somebody random in Walmart in the fishing section. I'd go up and I'd ask them a question. I'd be like, hey, do you crappie fish? They're like, oh, yeah, yeah, love it. It's like, when do you fish for them? Oh, during the spawn. Okay. Do you fish any other time? No, they don't bite. And I'll tell you what, I heard that 90% of the time. And at the beginning, I didn't really have the heart to say, well, they got to eat, right? They eat year round or they die. So after a couple months of this, I start saying, hey, what, do you think they just don't eat? And they kind of look at you and go, well, I never thought of it that way. So Tim, you're absolutely right. They got to eat somewhere, and it's a puzzle you got to solve, and that's the hardest thing to do. You know, Jerod, when you're trying to solve that puzzle, how hard do you think it is, and how long does it take you to make that decision and trust your gut and go somewhere else? Because I'm not going to mention his name, but the guy on the national trail that's won almost every tournament out there, seems like he makes split decisions and just goes. So it's like, how long does a normal person, when let's say our listeners are not fishing crappie tournaments and they just want to go out there and and fill their boat, and it might take them all day. Well, what could help them fill their boat in, let's say, 3 or 4 hours? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, if you're just out fishing to fill your cooler up and take some fish home to eat, I wouldn't stick around long if the fish aren't biting, especially if you have live scope and you can tell that. If you pull up if you're on the south end of any lake and you've fished 5 brush piles that have fish on them and the fish aren't biting, or they're acting lethargic, or you drop down to them and they don't even get they have no reaction. I wouldn't say it would take me long to to bail and start moving north if I'm on the south end of the lake, or vice versa. And as far as tournaments goes, I guess there's a couple factors that factor into that. Number two is how good is your B spot? If your A spot is stacked with big fish, and your B spot has pound fish, how I'm probably going to stick around a lot longer. But if I'm lucky enough to have an A and a B spot that have big fish, and they're not biting in the A spot, I'm probably going to go to the B spot and check them. I'm not saying in 3 hours I won't come back to my A spot and check those fish. I probably will at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, because you never know. You come back a couple hours and they'll be biting again.
Yeah.
And you would. I'll be honest with you, you wouldn't know that if you didn't have Livescope, in my opinion. So you're I'd say you're going to figure that out a lot faster, right?
Yeah.
Is what I'm trying to say.
Well, you can watch it happen. You can watch it happen. I mean, once you learn to pick out species of fish on Livescope.
Yeah.
If you're dropping on drum or, whatever it is, but once you figure out what a crappie looks like for the majority of the time, I still catch drum. I jigged up what I thought was going to be a 2.5 pound crappie yesterday. I was nervous as I could be dropping that jig down on the thing, and I caught a big old 3 pound striped bass. It was great. So that never goes away. But once you figure that out for the majority of the time, I would say, you can know that, well, these fish over here aren't acting right. And like Tim said, that's what we say is, we're just going to go a different part of the lake and find some fish that want to act right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I tell you what, you put some really good tips in there. If you're new to tournament fishing, I hope you picked up on that A, B, C spot. I mean, I know when I'm pre-fishing, I try to have 4 spots, A, B, C, D. And sometimes if the lake is big enough and I know it and I got a lot of pre-fishing in, I even go to F. So just never know, right? And like Tim said, you just got to move. You got to move and see where you can find fish that will play, right? So, I'm going to ask Randy one more question. Should the state's DNR, should they change their rules to help out with the crappie population since Livescope? Because I see this a lot too. What are your thoughts?
Actually, that's one of the things we're working on here in Arizona. As you said earlier, bass is king here, and a couple of our most productive lakes here in Arizona don't have a limit for crappie. And we're trying to put a limit on those lakes, and with the help of the Crappie Association of Arizona and the Crappie Fishermen of Arizona page, we're trying to get that word out there and bring that limit back to a reasonable number, so everybody can still catch plenty of fish and save our population a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. But do you think Livescope? Let me ask this a different way. Do you think Livescope has decreased the population or not?
Oh, absolutely not. I can pull up to some of these brush piles and see thousands of fish. I can pull up to some different lakes during the winter and look at 3 or 4 or 5,000 fish, and nobody can catch a fish. No, the fish are still there. The fish are everywhere. We tried fishing a nighttime one day last year, and there were so many small crappie in the 5 to 8 inch range. We could never get our baits down to the bigger crappie. I mean, the crappie the population is thriving. We are just starting to see a lot more and learn a lot more about our crappie out here because of Livescope.
Absolutely. That's out west. Here in the Midwest, I think it's the same way. I think Tim and Jerod could probably talk to that a little bit more, but I think it's going to be the same over what Randy just said. I mean, Tim, do you agree with that? Or Jerod, do you agree with that? What are your guys' thoughts?
I'm a big believer in harvest. I think there's a lot of lakes. We've got one on our tournament trail that I believe is under harvested. There's way too many white crappie in Rapin right now, I believe. I think Livescope actually helps in those situations where if you, and now there's getting to be some guides on wrapping, and it's helping. And I think it's helping bring our sizes up. But I do not think Livescope has hurt at all. I can't speak. I've heard a lot of guides are kind of going together in Texas on those lakes down there and trying to, save some of the bigger fish, because Livescope can have an impact, on those lakes. But here in the Midwest, I would say if we have a problem, it's probably under harvest.
You agree with that, Jerod?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. And to be honest with you, I catch less fish now with Livescope than I did before. But I'm such an avid tournament guy. In my mind, I'm programmed to look for big fish. And not that catching little ones aren't fun. When we go fun fishing, we still catch a bunch of fish. But I would say 95% of the time, when that 10-inch fish is out there, I just keep going by. Which spider rigging days or single poling days pre-Livescope, you'd catch those fish. I catch less fish now, but more quality size fish, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be honest. When what was that, Mega 360 came out, they kind of said the same thing, guys. It just seems like every time we get new technology out here, everybody wants to have excuses of why it's going to hurt crappie fishing or why it's going to hurt. But I think during this podcast, we pretty much summed it up that it's not hurting crappie fishing. It's not hurting the crappie tournaments either, in my personal opinion. I just don't. I think Livescope's here to stay. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think it's a great technology. Hummingbird's got Mega Live, and Lowrance has got theirs. I don't know what it's called. That'll be a different podcast to talk about for sure, because we could talk about that for hours. But yeah, I want to appreciate you guys coming out and being on the podcast. And we'll start one by one and kind of say thanks to your sponsors, or you want to say thanks to somebody else. We'll start with Tim first. Go ahead.
I guess I'd like to thank my wife for putting up with my my crazy hobby. Like to thank my partner, who's not on this podcast, but Nick Stupka, and the sponsors that we have as a team: Jinko Fishing, Cold Snap Outdoors, just another crappie bait company, I Hold Jigs, probably leaving somebody out here, Crappie Magnet, Central Financial Group, and Nationwide Insurance.
Awesome, Jerod.
Hey, I just want to thank you for having me, Brad.
Well, I thank you. I appreciate that.
Tim Nick is downstairs in my living room right now. I'll tell him you mentioned him.
Well, good. Tell him he needs to get home. Tell him he needs to get home and get to bed. He's got to get his rest for this weekend. And I failed to do that as well, Brad. Thank you for all you're doing for the Iowa Trail and all the state trails in general, and for your help in getting us into the National Crappie League and perhaps our national championship. So thanks for all you're doing for us.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Randy, go ahead, bud.
Well, yeah, I'd like to thank you as well. Corn Belt Crappie Trail, Midwest Alliance, B&M Fishing, Crappie Magnet, AZ Leadworks, Cameron's Custom Jigs, Mud Shark Marine. We can't do none of this without you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sponsors is a big thing in the sport. So, my podcast, even if our podcast gets sponsors, I'm always going to let everybody that comes on my show talk about their sponsors, because we can't do any of this without them. So thank you. You can check us out on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on Apple. We're on Spotify, iHeart, Amazon Music. Our podcast is pretty much on anything that offers a podcast. We're on it. So definitely go check out our website. It's on our Facebook page. And I appreciate everybody tuning in. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Brad. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. You guys have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you too.